So I want to start with a confession, and I apologize to the delegate who had a red lanyard that I hugged. As you know, I'm a kind of a huggy person, so I want to say I'm sorry about that. Good afternoon, everyone. As many of you know, my name is Emil Kang with the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation and longtime ISPA member and proud board member. We actually have the honor of being the final session of this year's historic Congress, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, David, we are the only one that's fully live as well. And I thought it'd be useful to bring us back to the Congress theme, the opportunity of now, and to hearken back to the words of our opening keynote speaker, futurist Marina Gorbis, who said, to imagine another world and to fight for it. We understand that culture, civic life, and public policy are inextricably linked in all our work, and yet, with all the pressures placed on artists and arts leaders, our sector has routinely been ill-equipped to imagine a future beyond the next payroll. And yet there have been inspirational moments throughout the pandemic, from virtual programming to guaranteed income programs for artists, to unprecedented levels of community engagement, organizing, and coalition building. And our sector has also taken cues from outside the arts. For example, the dance field took its lead from the NBA and the bubble they created in Florida for their teams to finish the 2020 season. Dance companies like the Dance Theater of Harlem, Alonzo King Line's Ballet, Camille S. Brown and Dancers, and AIM by Kyle Abraham, just to name a few, partnered with presenters and venues like the Jacob's Pillow Dance Festival, Works in Process at the Guggenheim, and Kotzebue Cultural Park in the Catskills. And they designed COVID-safe bubbles for companies so that dancers, crew, and staff could return safely to creative community and work through extended residencies in safety. This is just an example of how our sector is looking outside the arts to find solutions. And so I'm thrilled that today we are joined by two leaders whose purviews sit at the intersection of the arts, government, and business. Both of them have devoted their professional careers to making New York a better place. They will each share their insights on cross-sectoral approaches in this neighborhood right here in downtown Brooklyn and across all of New York City. And both our guests were and are responsible for sustaining hope and creating opportunity during some very dark days in our community. So as I said, I'm pleased to be joined by these two very proud New Yorkers. First, I'll introduce Regina Meyer, again, a lifelong New Yorker whose family first came to New York, if I'm not mistaken, in the 1890s, is that right? Yes. Her work in city planning and urban development has spanned from Hudson Yards to the New York City waterfronts, including the absolutely beautiful Brooklyn Bridge Park, and since 2016 has served as the president of the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership. Welcome, Regina. And we have to her right Gonzalo Casals, who first came to New York from Argentina in 2002 and has had an illustrious career at the High Line, El Museo del Barrio, and the Leslie Lohman Museum of Art, where he and I first met, until former New York City Mayor de Blasio tapped Gonzalo to serve as the commissioner of the Department of Cultural Affairs 2 years ago. Are we okay with your mic?
I'm hoping so.
Okay. And Gonzalo just stepped down from the post on December 31st with the mayoral transition. Welcome, Gonzalo.
Thank you.
So I feel like you're so far away. It's really, just really hard. We've designed this session not to be as much of an open conversation as possible, and knowing our guests, they have a lot to say, so I'm going to rely on them to continue to have conversations and jumping in wherever they feel is necessary. But I would like you all to be thinking about questions, because it's rare to have two such incredibly engaged citizens of a city like New York that really have cross-sectoral knowledge about how their work intersects with the rest of the city, politics, government, and business, and I hope you'll tap into their thoughts and their wisdom.
So much pressure, Emil.
Yeah.
Keep it down.
You just happy you're not on Zoom.
Yes, of course, Gonzalo, especially because everyone's so far away. So basically, my job will be to be the timekeeper and to make sure that we actually have everything going. So please, again, think of your questions, and towards the end, we'll of course open up to the conversation, which we have, of course, 2 standing mics and 2 roving ones. So Regina and Gonzalo, thank you both very much for joining us. I thought it'd be start just to do some table setting, because obviously you both work at this intersection of industries, working towards a better New York. And we have, of course, leaders from around the world, not just live, but also who'll be watching this over Zoom afterwards. And they might not be familiar with how New York City or government or local economic development corporations work. And well, to be honest, I'm not necessarily sure either. But I think it'd be helpful to begin with some of that. And as we're in downtown Brooklyn, Regina, let's start with you.
Oh, thank you. Can you hear? Okay. Thrilled to be here, and incredibly thrilled that the conference is here in downtown Brooklyn. Is this okay? Yeah. Because I think no place embodies how culture can come together in a community, in a neighborhood, in a downtown, organically, than in downtown Brooklyn. So you're all here in the BAM Opera House, of course, one of the city's most renowned stages. I can't quite believe I'm sitting on it. But that, the fact that BAM and the area around it has grown to be the Brooklyn Cultural District over the past 20 years is really an incredible feat that took a huge amount of partnership between local Brooklynites, local Brooklyn leaders like Harvey Lichtenstein, and of course the city of New York. And that, to me, really embodies what New York City is about. It's that incredible partnership between culture and business and government that has really had an incredible imprint on Brooklyn. And I am the president of the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership, which is a business advocacy group that advocates for the future of downtown Brooklyn, but also encompasses 3 business improvement districts that care for the downtown and care about its day-to-day cleanliness and landscaping and livelihood. And that nexus has been so important that culture is a part of that. We have on all of our boards incredible cultural participation, members from Brooklyn Academy of Music, BRIC, Mark Morris, Theater for New Audience, and it's those partnerships, I think, fast forwarding to the past 2 years and the crisis and the challenges we've all addressed that have made us really propel to the future. Just go back to the table setting, our responsibilities in the neighborhood as the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership is really about neighborhood building on a day-to-day basis to make sure people are really happy, that we're thriving, that we're really caring for one another, and frankly, we do some of the things that the city, which is so big, can't focus on the micro. We get the chance to focus on the micro, and having those partnerships with the various cultural institutions lets us do that better. And I just want to give you 2 examples that are really how embodied in our organizations. I'm so proud to say that we program all of the public plazas in our neighborhood. We have 4 of them, with programming through the summer months that really engages community on so many different levels, with family programming, public art, dance nights, soul nights, just a variety of programs that really embody so many great things that go on in the community right here. We do them in our public plazas. And you're seeing here a slide of a public art project we did in coordination with the Van Allen Institute, bringing the incredible work of Ekene Ejama to the plaza right outside on Ashland, Lafayette and Ashland. And this was a beautiful public artwork that we presented last winter. Another thing that we do, and the slides that are going past are actually I'll skip to that, are a number of public presentations that embody how much we partner with our local groups to bring great art to downtown Brooklyn. Mark Morris is located here in the district. We've partnered with them. Our Juneteenth celebration presented by 651 Arts, right here again on the plaza. Coordinating and working with BAM on a fantastic Pride celebration called Every Booty Tea Dance. Fantastic afternoon in June. Programming with BRIC, another fantastic organization just down the block on Fulton and Rockwell Place, the Brooklyn Poetry Slam. We also worked really hard in the past 2 years to provide free space for rehearsal residency right here, which was really, I think, sort of an emergency measure to use our plazas in the arts world, for the arts. And then, of course, these fantastic dance parties on Friday night, which bring a lot of fun and a lot of energy to our plazas, partnering with some long-standing soul groups that have really actually worked a lot in Fort Greene over the years. So it's really been a fantastic partnership to work in the public spaces from spring all the way deep into fall. The other thing that we do is we own a building called 80 Hanson Place, and that's a small building that has some really important arts tenants that we support in their office space. And I'm so proud to say that they include Makata, who will be moving to a new space in L10, the building just next door, in the coming year. But they established their gallery in our building, 80 Hanson. Also, we are landlord to StoryCorps, which is a national company that produces programs, personal histories, tremendously moving, as well as Bomb Magazine, which is, I think, the only hard copy magazine in the arts that has grown in the digital age. So I'm so pleased to be working with them. But that are ways that we work every day with arts organizations, and I'm really proud about those partnerships because they inform all of our work. They inform our owners, our landlords, and they also support us in different ways. I think what we've seen in the past decade is not just a growth in the arts in downtown Brooklyn, but in other related arts industries right here. And so we know that the investment that the city has made in the arts is not just about the art organizations, but it's also providing jobs in other sectors. And that's a tremendous success story, I think, for the city of New York. So we'll get into more conversation, but I think that was a good way to introduce you to some of the things that we're doing here in downtown Brooklyn.
Just maybe you want to, I'm sorry, I'm taking the role.
Please, but thank you.
For those that are not in New York or probably in the US, explain how the model of the business improvement district.
Oh, sure.
Because
sure.
it's a perfect model of a civic commitment, right?
Yeah, the interesting thing about business improvement districts is that we're self-financed, and we receive approval by the city council and the city government to literally tax ourselves to pay for these programs. So there's an assessment every year that we've agreed to. It's above and beyond New York City and New York State and federal taxes that comes to us directly, and we receive approval to pay for cleaning the streets, landscaping, and programs like many of the ones you saw on the slides, all by this assessment dollar. And so our...
Again, paid for by the businesses in the district.
Correct.
The landlords.
Yes, the landlords,
right?
sorry.
Yeah.
And so I go to them, I mean, it's actually a real budget process with a proposal. We're working on it now for March approval. And we are so proud to present as a part of that expenditure money to support the arts in our district. And I'm happy you raised that because it really points to the fact that our owners understand how important those efforts are for them. Now, sometimes they're self-serving about it and say, this is an arts district, come move here, come invest here. But the fact is it's that partnership that keeps us vital and is really differentiating ourselves. So thank you.
And there's 30 some across the city, all sizes and...
There's 75 business
75.
improvement districts across the city. Some of the largest and most well-known ones are, of course, Times Square, the Alliance in Times Square, Lower Manhattan, Grand Central, and all of them, I think, do incredible work promoting the arts and understanding how important it is to the city. And it's actually a joy for me to be colleagues with them as well. And then there's very small business improvement districts that are more focused on the cleaning and the greening and safety of neighborhood streets, more akin to merchant associations, I would say.
Great.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine.
Thank you, Regina. And Gonzalo, from you, you took over the role as commissioner right after COVID started. Or maybe you got the position and then COVID occurred. Is that right? What was the sequence?
I was appointed on March 11, 2020.
Wow, my God.
March 13, 2020 is when I was directing Les Loman, when many cultural organizations, we decided that we were going to close. This is how much, and maybe many colleagues are here and know this. This is how much we did not know. We said, let's close through the weekend. Mondays and Tuesdays, we're closed, most of us. Let's have a call on Monday and see we open on Wednesday. And then it became, well, we'll check week after week, right? And at that moment, the city says, no, don't close. You're going to scare everybody. The city shut down on March 17. The state, actually, not the city, the whole state. And I'm going to get a little personal. I got sick with COVID right at that moment. And I'm perfectly well. If anything, COVID made me softer, which is not a bad thing. And one of the things, like I always like to start in situations like this is, I'm approaching life now from a perspective of gratitude. And the same way that we created this tradition of acknowledging the land in which we are, I always like to acknowledge the work of artists. And I want to thank both Nick and Kale for the work that they just did. And in thanking them, thanking all the artists, it brought me so much joy to just see live art, right? And remind us how much we miss it. And I want to leave it there because I don't want to cry. And that brings me to the story. If you want to just show some of the slides, I also want to start with a personal story, which is in the middle of the shutdown. I live in Jackson Heights, Queens. And with a group of us, it was 6 of us, curator, artist, scholar, myself, another artist. We didn't know what else to do. And we realized that the Public Art Fund, the LaGuardia Airport, the Terminal B, just was opening, and the Public Art Fund, and you just can go fast with the images. Had opened the terminal with amazing public art, and we walked all the way 15 minutes to LaGuardia from Jackson Heights just to have the experience of being with art. We had missed for 3 months. And I'm telling this story because it's a little bit what we experienced in the last 2 years and the process that we saw in the city, but also because it speaks a little bit of the last almost 20, 25 years of cultural policy in New York City, which, as Regina, you were saying, during the Bloomberg administration, there was a real clear understanding that art could be an engine for economic development, right? And that was sort of like the main emphasis behind that. With the de Blasio administration and the idea of equity, we focus more on what's the social impact of the arts. And as we started to think about recovery, we start understanding that there's the third aspect of the role of arts and culture, which is the intrinsic aspect, right? What I was just telling now. It makes us human, it brings us joy. Joy, it makes us feel better. And as we start thinking about the recovery, we were thinking, how we have to have this triple bottom line now, right? We're not like Bloomberg that we were coming up from September 11, and it was all about the economic development of downtown of New York City. It wasn't just about the social impact of the art and equity, or it wasn't only about the well-being of all of us. It's about all of us together, understanding that we are living in what we call a triple pandemic, if you will, which is the public health issue we have with COVID, is the racial injustices that we continue to have to be reawakened as the mainstream on what has been happening in our country for centuries. And then, unfortunately, a pandemic that we had for a long time, that we have not been paying attention, and then have been accelerated by COVID, which is mental health, right? And as the pandemic was unfolding in New York was the epicenter in the country in the early 2020s. I always emphasize that as we were working across different agencies, they were only coming to us for what I call the lowest hanging fruit, right? Do you have a space? We need to set up a hospital, right? So the shed could be a huge space, could be an amazing place to be a hospital. The Bronx Zoo has huge parking lots, and it's strategically located in an area of the city in which we needed a lot of ambulances. And actually, the city of New York had to bring ambulances from other counties because we didn't have enough, and they needed a place to park, right? It was a very utilitarian approach to what arts and culture could do for the city. Culture organizations were really happy to be in a civic partner. That evolved in food pantries, evolved in vaccination sites, and then little by little we were able to convince our partners at different agencies that there was so much more that we can do. And that so much more was that culture organizations had built relationships, partnerships, trust in communities, that they had a reach that the city wouldn't have, and that we could also be an arm of connecting and providing information, providing services, you name it. There were a few instances that was really interesting for us to think. One of them, and again, going back to LaGuardia, is how places, and we were talking with Regina about this, how places that were strictly for tourists became available again to New Yorkers, right? And how, because we didn't have the indoor spaces, those outdoor spaces came alive and New Yorkers reconnected. Parks, streets, plazas, airports, you name it. So the work that we do with the Department of Transportation, with the open streets, that then became open culture, and we can talk more later a little bit about the challenges about that and how it worked and it didn't work. The really close collaboration that we did with New York City and Company, which is our Secretary of Tourism, in which we couldn't bring tourists to New York, and all of a sudden they turned around and they said, how we can get New Yorkers to visit other neighborhoods and get to know New York. So there was a lot of continue to teach to our colleagues across the city what are the different aspects of the different ways that arts and culture can affect the life of New Yorkers. And I'm going to say two things, and I'm going to just give it back to you, Emil. Number one is, before I became commissioner in 2017, I was one of the 6 consultants that wrote the cultural plan for the city of New York. And we did a survey back then to understand, first of all, it was one of probably the largest participatory processes that the city had put together, with over 25,000 people involved in the process. And we did a survey asking people, how important is arts and culture to you? And 96% of New Yorkers say that arts and culture is an important part in their lives. When we did a similar survey during the pandemic, that number went to 86. When you look at the national level, on a normal circumstance, only 50% thinks arts and culture is important to them, and during the pandemic, it went down to 40%. So that tells you a little bit, how important for New Yorkers and how much part of their identity and their life, the work that we all do is. And you were talking about imagining a new world, right? I'm going to share two quotes. One is Mark Fisher that says that it's easier for us to imagine the end of the world as we know it than to imagine the end of capitalism, right? And I'm bringing this up because we're rushing to go back to the normal, and the normal wasn't really good, right? The pandemic acted as a magnifying glass for the inequities that we were having in our society, and then accelerated a lot of trends that are making those inequities and that gap bigger. And then the other quote is that while we're not in a renaissance anymore, in which arts and culture are defining the structural changes of our society, still arts and culture is what's going to help us make sense of those changes. And, how do we continue again to make sure those are not the choir, but those are outside the choir, just to use a cultural pun here, how they can understand the importance of that.
Thank you very much, Gonzalo. And I just want to note, things are better or different when you actually go to LaGuardia on purpose, and you're not going for a flight. So that's actually a really, really good thing. I think those are things I have to remember. That's really fantastic. And Gonzalo, thank you as always for your first-person personal view of this work and the value and the importance of acknowledging the work of artists. And I think at some point we can talk more about the role of artists as a workforce in our city, which is, I know, something that you believe strongly in. But I guess, Regina, back to you. In the work that you showed us in your presentation, all of the performances, if I could ask you just to sort of unpack that more for us and you talked about the valuable partnerships with the institutions. You, of course, mentioned BAM. Could you talk a bit about how you stitch those relationships together with larger institutions, with smaller ones, and then how does that power dynamic reveal itself with you, both from an institutional perspective and then also for trying to actually establish and create agency for individuals, artists and others who are the ones actually on the stages? Yeah,
it's a great question. I think there's 3 or 4 different answers. So I'll start in the larger institutional and then go through to the artists, because I don't want to ignore anything that you've asked. Like I mentioned, it's been key for me in the structure of our organizations to have representation from the various art institutions. So in every board that we have, in all board meetings, there's cultural representation. And that's been really great because you're sitting at the table with a variety of people who are your board members. They're your bosses in a way, right? And you need to make sure that the narrative of the company, or I feel my narrative of our work, is responsive to all of the partners in the room. And I think that's really sets the stage for the way our organization thinks. When I know I'm doing a presentation on highlights or what's new in downtown Brooklyn, and it doesn't just include the real estate or the school openings or the new restaurants, but it also includes the fact that the Majestic Theater just reopened with a brand new entrance. Those are things that really matter to us organizationally, to recognize how hard each organization has worked to bring what they do to the district. So I'd say that on the organizational part, having members like either BAM or Mark Morris, or Center for Fiction, or BRIC at the table continually is important. Right. And those are quarterly meetings, for instance, with all of my members. Another thing that we do also on the institutional side, which really gets to programming and day-to-day partners, is we meet monthly with the culturals in the direct area here around Lafayette Avenue because of the important investment the city is making in the building next door called L10. And L10 is a new condominium. It's opened several years ago with a great retail component, Apple and Whole Foods, what would be better in New York City, of course, or Brooklyn. But it also will include expansion space for 4 really important local groups. Makata, which I mentioned earlier, 651, which is a very long-standing, mostly performance-based group here in Fort Greene, the Brooklyn Public Library, and BAM. And them having new space here at Lafayette Avenue has been really, has informed our thinking about the public space right here next to BAM on Lafayette Avenue. And so those monthly meetings are really have really varied over the years in terms of their goals and their importance. In the early years for me, I started at this job 5 years ago. A lot of it was about information gathering and information sharing, about timelines and what was going on in the neighborhood. And now, as we approach this happy day that they will be able to open their doors at the end of this calendar year 2022, we're really talking about our partnerships in programming the space and how it'll look like once they get there. And so that's a really important institutional way that we include the culturals. We're meeting, they're on my calendar. And that's really informs how we think about programming public space. Because we want and need to work with each one of those groups to make sure, although I know their biggest concerns are people going over their thresholds into their doors. I know that, right? That's every institution's worries are what goes inside their spaces, and of course their hopes and dreams too. My job is to think about the open space and the public space and the neighborhood, which is usually, for the right reasons, secondary to them. And it's been a joy for me and the staff to really come together and talk about how we can program together on the public space. So what you saw on the slides were really the embodiment of all of those partnerships. So now that it's January going on February, oh my gosh, we're already thinking about the spring, summer, and fall program and making sure all those groups are slotted in and slotted in on a calendar that works for them as well, right? They have their own programs that make perfect sense outdoors. And I'd say the answer to the third question is each of those programs lets us support the artistic community, because what's important about that in each of those programs is the fact is that art is getting made and presented by artists.
Great, thank you. Gonzalo, back to you, and I think this might be a question that Regina could comment on as well. And you referenced open streets, open culture, open restaurants. I think, I'm sure everyone in this room has actually been to a restaurant that has had some kind of outdoor capacity, and we know that the city is going to keep that going, at least for some time. But I know restaurants probably want, and of course, even with the to-go alcohol sales, all of that, these are things that I feel like are not going to ever go away again. I think they're going to be with us for a while. And to your question about arts organizations always wanting to go back into their spaces, I guess it's a question, maybe Gonzalo, you might know some, and of course, from your perspective as well, Regina, do you imagine a time when organizations will actually think outside of their spaces permanently? What prevents them from doing so, and how might that affect the way they work and perhaps even the way DCLA works?
Yeah, couple of things. Also, just to follow up, to answer that question and follow up with what Regina was saying, it was remarkable to see how during the pandemic, all the actors and still, cultural pants here, all the actors and part of the process, from the executive, like the administration and DCLA, the city council, the cultural sector, tourism, we all got aligned together. And as Regina said, each of us have a different, priority, but we all had, this main priority. And it was interesting how we all got behind something, but at the same time, we all understood what our roles were, right? There were moments in which I was invited to speak in a demonstration, in support of artists. I was like, well, but you're complaining about the work that I'm doing, so I should not be speaking there. I'm glad that you're doing it. I always tell people, there are going to be moments where you're going to have to make me do things and yell at me so I can do it and prove the others that you have to do it. But I love the model of the business improvement district because, like the city, because of that, the city in a moment like this, we all got together and it felt really natural. And there was this amazing phenomena, which is Culture at 3, and maybe many of you participate on that in New York, which since the beginning of the pandemic, every day at 3 o'clock, hundreds of representatives of culture organizations, they get together. At the beginning was to share information, then it was about advocacy, and they continued to do that. And it made it easier for us as government to go to listen what the priorities were, to just test out policies, and to also make announcements. But there are power dynamics, and I love when you say that because I can speak hours about that. And in terms of going outside of their spaces, we were able to do a $25 million investment directly on artists. The Department of Cultural Affairs is the largest public funder in the country, more than the state of New York and more than the federal government. We're on a good year, we're at $250 million. That includes $100 million in long-term investment in capital and then $150 in programming. We do not program, we just pay people to do programs for us. That's how I like to put it. Which I think that's what the role of government should be, that decentralized approach to arts and culture. And I'm saying that because the way we do this, we do not support artists directly. We give money to culture organizations to hire artists or to re-granting organizations to grant for artists. So in this case, it was the first time in probably 4 decades that the city of New York was making such a large investment that was directly going to artists.
To individuals.
Individual, yeah. And it was $5,000 grants. They were supposed to be relief grants because we're the city and it's taxpayer dollars. I couldn't just give money for free. So we asked in exchange to do some community engagement that they wanted to do in whatever they wanted to do in New York City. And we left it very open. And the example that we're using is, if you get the grant, you get $5,000. You want to go and play the cello at the park for an hour and call it a day, and then pay the rent. Be my guest. What was really interesting, and this is answering your question, is that over 75%, and what we did is we gave them the grant, we gave them access to open culture, which was all these streets that were close to cars and open to people, in which, for the first time, individual artists could ask for a permit to the city to do something on the street. And then we created a network of venues, cultural organizations that were offering their spaces for the artists to do what they wanted. The idea was just to put the power on the hand of the artists and decide what they wanted to do and where they wanted to do it, and show up to Regina, show up to BAM and said, I'm paid for, I would like to do this, can we partner? What was interesting is that almost 75% of those artists, they perform or they presented their work in non-cultural spaces. Parks, public plazas, bars, churches, you name it. And I love that, our cultural organizations, but also I love that artists think in a much more expansive way of where their work belongs.
Right. And just to follow up on that, Gonzalo, we talked about this earlier, that we don't know if this is actually true, but people don't always know that in New York City alone, that one of the, if not the largest employer of artists is not the cultural sector, but the Department of Education, because they are the ones who actually offer contract to teaching artists to work in the schools. And of course, it was made public, the disastrous impact on teaching artists when the DOE canceled these contracts during COVID. I guess the question to you is, how do you think about the future of the agency, I guess that way, and its need to be able to articulate where the artists are actually working? And I think there's a larger question that, Gonzalo, you and I have talked about, is we don't even fully know where artists are actually practicing, in which sectors. How can we know, and what are the opportunities that are in front of us?
There's a lot of opportunities, and I look forward to work on that in the near future. There's a few things. There's a lot of unknowns. First of all, we don't know. Nobody at the city could tell me how much money the city would spend in arts and culture in total, right? I knew what my budget was, but there's the media and entertainment, there's the Department of Education, there's the Department of Youth and Community Engagement, Department of Probation, there's Department of Transit, Parks. Everybody is somehow either hiring artists and programming or contracting with the cultural organizations to do that. And I would love to get to the end of that, hopefully very soon.
Like arts and
arts and transit, but also,
art in public spaces and art subway stations.
DOT plazas, you know, just, you name it, right? And I would like to understand that because one of the reasons why teaching artists and artists were the hardest hit at the very onset of the pandemic is because of the way they're hired. Right. They're hired as independent contractors, and again, I can
no
speak,
security.
You stop me, right? Because I can speak for hours here. There's the artists do this because it gives them some freedom. I can work, you know, part-time, or I can work seasonally and then can work in my studio. But that puts them outside of getting any benefits. And when we have to make tough decisions, they're the first people to get laid off with no severance or anything like that. So how we can change the way not only government, but culture organizations that government has contracts with engages with those artists.
That's great. Regina, I think back to you, and I want to remind everyone to please be thinking of your questions. We'll get to them in a few minutes. You, of course, have a board. We know that you do, that are made up of landlords, and they are, of course, taxing themselves in order to do better in their own communities. And yet we still acknowledge, and there are many people who probably lament it, and they lament the power and the impact, especially for those who have rarely or never had a voice. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm sure it's a question that you're used to getting. But I guess I wonder how you think about that reality and how the programming of public spaces that you have talked about, which are wonderful, how you sort of walk the line and all of this work in order to try to create a sense of inclusion and inclusivity around the work that you do that isn't simply about trying to line the pockets of the wealthy.
Well, I think for me in my career, it's been happenstance, but I've for the past 20 years, I've been doing work that really is about where the public sector meets the private sector. Earlier in my career, when I led the the Brooklyn Office of City Planning in the first part of the Bloomberg administration, we were really setting a tone for the entire revival of Brooklyn, which was a borough that really, for most of the post-war, World War II era, had so little private investment. And when we started to think about reinvestment in places like Williamsburg, Greenpoint, downtown Brooklyn, so much of that also had to do with not just finally seeing private investment for housing, but also for public space. Right. And that led me to take over at the helm of Brooklyn Bridge Park in 2006, where I had this phenomenal opportunity to build a mile and a half of waterfront on the Brooklyn waterfront, which had been inaccessible for decades to the public. The tension there is the city and the state were willing to pay for a great deal of capital improvements, but they were not willing to pay for the waterfront infrastructure. And the program we devised to pay for that required private development. And it was really a phenomenal job because I had the opportunity to build a beautiful park designed by one of North America's greatest landscape architects, Michael van Valkenburg. And at the same time, spend half my time doing that, and then the other half of the time figuring out, holy shit, we have to pay for part of this, and we have to figure out a development program. And the development program succeeded because it was really well designed to include residential space, which was incredibly lucrative, of course, as well as new commercial space, new cultural space, and affordable housing. Right. And that was an incredible tension, but I think we pulled it off really well. There's a new hotel right at the foot of Old Fulton Street. We were able to renovate a building that had been literally abandoned for 50 years for commercial use, called Empire Stores, which has some of Brooklyn's hottest office space now, West Elm and others. But we also were able to bring one of an abandoned structure for the arts. And that commitment to bring art into that real estate deal was actually one of the hardest things we did, but also one of the most satisfying. St. Anne's Warehouse, I think, as you all know, is an international programming company. They have very, very strong ties to a number of great institutions across the ocean.
The world, yeah.
Really global. And so that was really something I spent almost 3 years doing, was getting St. Anne's Warehouse in the waterfront and the park.
Regina, just to interrupt a minute, a beautiful thing they did the summer of 2020 is put DJs and performers on the terrace. And people dancing in the park, safely distanced. It was beautiful.
Susan was tremendous. She's always thinking globally. And in fact, we hope to be working with St. Anne's Warehouse with a company, a puppetry company she's bringing from Ireland to do a wonderful pageant in downtown Brooklyn next year.
That's great.
So it's really, those are very important relationships. But going to your question, for me, there's just that I've always been comfortable working in a place where there was private interests, and then that I was always the one defending public space and democratic interests. And we were joking in the green room, I think earlier, that, you know, building Brooklyn Bridge Park, there was actually people who were against the park, and that was not because of the, not only because of some of the development, but because of the fact we were opening the waterfront up to the entire city. And nothing makes me happier than the fact that any of us can dependably go down to that park and know that they see the entire breadth of New Yorkers there at the park. So just by bringing that home here to downtown Brooklyn, there's no question to me that what happens in our public plazas and our streets happens for everyone. And we have the opportunity to work with DOT, closing streets throughout the year on a seasonal basis and increasing our plaza space. And for me, that's always about the public. And our neighborhoods need to thrive with everyone. And I'm proud to say that no matter who's in the room.
Right.
So I guess that's my answer to that
thank
question.
you. That's a great answer.
And Emil, you know, there's a lot more work that we need to do bringing down, you know, the cultural hierarchies in the sector, right? And cultural organizations in New York are doing a lot of work to do that internally and externally. But having worked at the High Line and having done a lot of, you know, at the Museo del Barrio, we always said it was not only about the museum, it was about the neighborhood, right? The museum of the neighborhood. And it's interesting to see how the minute you start doing something outside the walls of your cultural organization, people lose the innovations that you may have inside of the cultural organization. You know,
they lose the innovations?
Inhibitions.
Oh, inhibitions.
Yeah, right?
Okay.
You know, like sort of like, they're like more open to engage. Right. And then, and I want to give a shout out to Ariana Hellerman, who works with Regina. You know, there's a generation, I come from that generation of, you know, like, we're not curators, we're just here to put, you know, the public in contact with amazing artists. And that removes some of the complexities of having to respond to the cultural hierarchies that are already dominant in the sector. Right. And that's when you start opening up and you start seeing new audiences come in.
I'd like to start inviting you all to just come to the microphones if you're so inclined while I ask one last question. And please join us in conversation. I'm going to ask another thorny question, which I know it won't be a surprise, but obviously we've seen in New York City alone in the last 10 years or longer public-private partnerships in order to actually build out spaces, and at the same time both build out spaces that are mixed-use spaces, but also public available spaces, and but also in the creation of new institutions, of new cultural institutions. Obviously, the most recent ones I will mention are the Shed and Little Island in particular, and the one coming downtown at Ground Zero, the Performing Arts Center down there, the Parliament Center. What are your thoughts about that and the challenges that existing institutions have always had in actually securing resources, and at the same time now, new institutions are being created and actually also taking, potentially, arguably, taking resources. And how does that work? And is the pie getting bigger, or are people getting smaller pieces of the pie? And again, it's really a question I meant to be a provocation.
And we have 17 minutes to respond, right? You want to start?
You go first.
So there's a lot there. As I was talking about 20 years of cultural public policy in New York City, during the Bloom administration, there was that question: how much culture is too much? How much too much culture is too much culture, right? And should we have less organizations and that receive more money? One of the things that it was sort of like stays with me, and I was extremely surprised when I came into the ECLA, is we support around 1,300 organizations.
Right.
50–60% of them are organizations, what we call small organizations, who had a budget under $250,000, right? And we think that that doesn't count the organizations that don't apply to us, but apply to the local arts councils, because they're not a 501c3, they're artist collective. And we think that, in addition, in total, including those organizations, probably there's 5,000 organizations out in New York City, big and small, right?
These would be 5,000 nonprofit organizations, or all kinds?
All kinds of organizations, 501c3, artist collectives, LLCs, and their fiscal sponsor, you name it, right? And it goes from the group that gets together at the church to do Ecuadorian folk dances to band, right? And to me, there's a lot of value on that decentralization. Mm-hmm. But you asked the right question, right? There's no money to go around for everyone. So there are a couple of challenges that we need to face. One is, how do we start bringing money from outside, the usual suspects, the public-private philanthropy. And I'm going to give you an example. Many of you, if you live in the US and mostly New York City, you just realized in the last years that your health insurance is paying for your gym membership. And why is that? It's because it's preventive medicine. There's something called social prescription that means that if you have a number of opportunities to be in contact with arts and culture, that's so much better for your health. Can we set up, a partnership in which we bring, the health sector, who has a lot of resources, and start bringing new money into the pot. But in general, what became very evident during the pandemic is a couple of things. One is none of us can do all this alone. The Department of Cultural Affairs, while we're very proud of being a funder, we also understood that we need to have the role of convener and advocate. And we can go back to, you're talking about public-private partnerships, we can go back to 1860 when the Museum of Natural History was created. It was the first public-private partnership created between the city and, in which, you're going to build a building and we're going to build a collection. Right. The Met is another example, and so on and so on. And then the other thing is there are problems that we're facing that no matter how much money you're going to throw at them, you're not going to be able to solve them because you need creativity.
Thank you, Gonzalo.
Well, Gonzalo has the wide breadth of knowledge about the finances that I...
So hard to
yeah.
come down from
But
that.
I mean, for me, the way I take your statement is there is so much art to present, and there are so many more artists will have the ability to present that it doesn't scare me that there's more stages.
Got it.
Now, I know that others would feel differently because there are so many stresses and so many budgets to worry about. But from a audience perspective and from a perspective of seeing how much more creativity there is in the city and how many more opportunities, I'm sort of blown away. I mean, that's just a casual observation, but it's phenomenal. And I also think, you know, the idea that, especially for me, the shed, what's interesting about the shed for me is the unusual space configuration really gives the opportunity for visual artists and visual artists with performing artists to do projects that we don't have the space for. I mean, I know that sometimes happens at a place like the Park Avenue Armory, but there aren't that many places where really large scale and great things can happen that way. So I don't know, that's my passerby as an audience response.
That's great, thank you, Regina. I do believe we have one question here. I think, do you have a question? Oh, you're just holding the mic. Okay, there we go. It's hard to see over there. Is that Sophie?
Hi, thank you so much.
Could you introduce yourself first as well?
Yes, my name is Jimena Lara. I'm come from Mexico City, from the Anglo-Mexican Foundation. Thank you to the three of you. Very, very interesting panel. I guess I just would like to mention something that happens in many cities, certainly in Mexico City, where, you know, when a neighborhood is sort of looked at in a different way and new investment comes in, whether if it's public or private, and new you know, buildings get renovated or spaces get rescued, and certainly art plays a very important part of you know, changing the nature and the spirit of the neighborhood. And then gentrification happens, and it's harder for artists to stay where the art is, right? And suddenly artists start to have to move to other neighborhoods. And I wonder, in New York City, you know, how have you seen that phenomenon, and what are your perspective or reflections on that?
Thank you.
We probably are the poster child of art washing, or, you know, like, which is bringing arts and culture just to clean up a neighborhood and then, you know, reinvest. Not everything that happens in New York is like that, but it happens. You're seeing that a little bit on Canal Street recently and some other areas. But I think that's what is important to understand. So there are a few things, right? I'm very careful. I love my neighborhood, Jackson Heights. Many people would just call it a cultural desert because we have no cultural organizations in that area. But what's culture, and, you know, who defines culture? It's one of the most diverse neighborhoods in the country and in the world. Newer generations are expanding the definition of culture to include food, to include so many other experiences. And there's a group here that I was part of before I had to quit everything to join the city, which is called, it's a silly name, but it's called the Naturally Occurring Cultural Districts, which is this idea of how do you revitalize a neighborhood from the bottom up, taking in consideration the local, indigenous by local, right? You know, arts and culture of the neighborhood without creating displacement. It can be done. It's hard, but it can be done.
I would say if there's opportunities in new projects or in projects that are renovated to advocate for specific areas to be set aside for culture, that's something worth doing. That's exactly what DCLA did here in downtown Brooklyn with each of the new buildings. Significant and sizable amount of space was set aside for cultural organizations. For instance, the Center for Fiction right across the street is in a brand new apartment house. So I think that it's really worth on a building by building basis to fight for space or advocate for space, to be included. And the other thing is, I'd say that, we've had some surprises here in Brooklyn. Certainly as Greenpoint and Williamsburg redeveloped, there was a loss, especially of studio space, very inexpensive studio space, but surprisingly, the redevelopment spurned a whole new district for music that we never had. So, now areas, Williamsburg is defined by National Sawdust and a few other phenomenal venues that were not even a glimmer before there was redevelopment there. So I think that what I've seen is that although there has been a loss, there's also been certain gains, and it's an interesting thing.
Yeah, the challenge is, and there's a quasi-government agency in New York called the Economic Development Corporation, which is behind a lot of the examples that you mentioned. And it took us a minute, and by a minute, probably 10 years, to figure out, how to work together, cultural affairs and EDC, and just really create these spaces for culture. But I believe the biggest depth that we have is creating more working and living space for artists. We're seeing a lot of artists moving to Philadelphia. Philadelphia is becoming the 6th borough, right? And because they can live there, they can work there, and they're still connected to New York City. And the challenge is, going back to what we were talking with Emil earlier, is because of the way artists get paid, they don't qualify because they don't get paid, they don't have a salary every 2 weeks or at the end of the month. To show for, they don't qualify for affordable housing, they don't qualify for a lot of benefits that other professionals can afford. How many people speak Spanish here? Raise your hand. So I'm going to tell a joke in Spanish that does not translate in English. There's a group in Spain that's called Gentrificación no es el nombre de una señora mayor, and it advocates for gentrification. If you don't speak Spanish and you want to explain, see me after the panel.
Anthony, is that you? I can't see.
Yeah, hi. A terrific panel, really superb panel. A question for Gonzalo. Interestingly, the thought of taking on that role of Commissioner for Culture at the beginning of the pandemic, that's what a thought. And it's interesting looking at cities and countries, perhaps cities and regional governments around the world, is there's quite a fault line between the places where the people in your position, the Commissioners for Culture, got the support of the other departments in terms of realizing how important culture was, and the places where they were very much fighting a battle to stake their claim for the importance of culture in getting through the pandemic, and very particularly in coming out of the pandemic. And I just wondered what the rest of the council of the city of New York, how it felt about the work that you were doing in the arts.
Interesting question. And first of all, I want to say that I would not have wanted to be doing anything else than this job in a moment like this. Just to think that New York City put the future and the public policy of arts and culture on an immigrant, it's amazing, right? And for an immigrant that owes his life and his career to the cultural sector in New York City, to be in a moment like this, to give back to that sector and to the city that I call home, has been a tremendous privilege. Crazy, but tremendous. I was, as we were getting ready for the transition and being a lot in contact with advocates and the sector, I kept saying that, the biggest challenge that we have still is to continue to educate people to understand the importance of arts and culture in the life of a city, right? And that we're not that sort of entertainment thing that you slash it, at the beginning of a financial crisis or a public health crisis. And mostly in a moment like this, in which the whole administration is coming, new mayor, new city hall, and also 2/3 of our city council, it's completely new. It feels like you have to start all over again. My predecessor, Tom Finkerpel, who's an amazing colleague, started a project that was really interesting, and it's a drop in the bucket. And I have to confess, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was like, we're too busy, we're going to have to get rid of these. And I'm happy that my staff maybe changed my mind, which is putting artists in residency in different agencies. And what we do is, for a year, we pay an artist $40,000 to work in an agency and collaborate with different city employees in projects that are interested in. And I don't want to take a lot of time with that. The project is called Public Artists in Residency. And again, I can talk to any of you after the panel about the amazing projects that we have seen happening out of that. But the biggest outcome is how much we're just changing, the minds of those, what we call now the deep state, those employees that they stay no matter who is the mayor and who is in the council, and they become advocates of arts and culture.
Thank you, Gonzalo. Yes, sir.
Is there time for another question?
Yes, please.
Great. First of all, thank you to the panel.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Sorry. First of all, thank you to the panel. Fantastic insights. I'm Torsten from Manchester City Council, and cultural placemaking is something we're really interested in Manchester. And Gonzalo, you spoke about the social impact of culture, which is also something we're really interested in. And I was just wondering, do you have any systematic evaluation mechanisms that you deploy to measure this impact, sort of beyond the anecdotal and the case study? And maybe also to Regina, given your membership, and it's probably fairly unpopular to mention this, but economic impact, is that something that you measure for the arts as part of your organization? Thank you.
Thank you.
There's a ton of studies about the economic impact of arts and culture, and there's a ton of studies of how much the city lost, and the private sector lost because of the arts and culture closing. So you can Google that. And then if you go to this website, I'm rushing because we have a minute and a half. If we go to the website of DCLA, or you look at the social impact of the arts project, my predecessor, Tom Finkelpel, brought a group of scholars from Philadelphia to do a study. Those neighborhoods in which there's existence of arts and culture, either the Met or a choir in the church, it doesn't matter, or are making in the libraries, public safety increases, high school dropout decreases, health increases, so on and so on. And I'm glad to say that we're bringing them back this year to overlay, the impact of COVID and see, how that had progressed. But you have all the information there.
Thank you, Gonzalo. Regina, anything you want to add?
Just really quickly, I think we know that job growth in downtown Brooklyn has been impacted by culture. We have two of very large podcasting companies related who've located here, and I like to think that those are the corollaries to some of the investments in culture, is that for-profit companies with a media bent are comfortable locating here. And I'd say the other thing is the relationship to our schools is so important. And when we think about downtown Brooklyn growing, I know that there's this nexus between culture, our schools and education, and job growth. So those are the things I like to think about.
Great. Well, thank you. We are now just 10 seconds over, but I do want to thank you all. I know this is the end of the Congress, but thank you very much for joining us. And it's been a real pleasure to be in conversation with both of you. If I can ask you all just to join me in thanking our guests. Before we head off stage, I've been asked to announce that it's actually time for a break and that we will reconvene at 3:35. Thank you very much.